That's pretty centered. Okay. Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Julie. Today's video, I don't know why I felt the need to introduce you to who Today's video, I wanted to do sort of a halfway point checkup on my 2020 reading list. I started doing this in 2019. I made a books I wanted to read in 2019. I fell very short of that mark, and then in 2020 I revised it to be kind of completely different, and I still had a stack of books that I wanted to read, but I made it much more realistic to what I was capable of doing. It's now getting into July, and I wanted to kind of do a halfway point checkup, like I said, to show you where I've gotten to and how I've been progressing through that, because I think I've been doing pretty well. So for a quick refresher, this is a stack of all of the books that I was wanting to read / finish reading in 2020. And of these books, so far I have completed reading all of these. Now, this is the only one that was not in the original list of books to read. So of that list, all of these I read. And this one, if you watched, I think it was my 2020 reading list video in January, I said that I read this last year, but then I went back and I was looking it up and I actually did not read this book at all. So I read it this time. Basically, I wanted to go through and just do a quick what each book is about type of summary, in case you're interested in any of them. So first up we have Surprised by Hope by N.T. Wright, and this book was the only book in my list of books to read that I had already started reading and I only needed to finish. And I left it in my list because this book was taking me a very long time to read, and I was finding it to be a very challenging read from what I was used to reading. And I ended up finishing it by mostly listening to it on audiobook, because I found I was able to retain the information that I was hearing better than reading it. So this book, the little tagline on the front cover says, "Rethinking Heaven, the Resurrection, and the Mission of the Church." And this basically goes over talking about all of those things. What is the mission of the church? How should the church, as Christians, as God-fearing, Bible-believing people, what should we as the church be doing in preparation for Jesus coming back? Looking at what the Bible says and actually understanding what it's actually saying and not just what we want it to say. As far as the resurrection, Jesus coming back, why we should be celebrating Easter so much more than we actually do, and what heaven means, and when Jesus comes back and he's bringing heaven to earth, how we should prepare for that. And it's a fantastic read, and N.T. Wright is just an awesome author in general. N.T. Wright's writing level is pretty high. It's, easily college grade writing level, which is why it took me so long to read through it, because I am not accustomed at all to reading college grade material. I will be the first to admit that. So I really enjoyed it. It did just take me a long time to get through. Next up are the 3 Sue Grafton books that I had in my list. Now, these are all part of a series by the author Sue Grafton. They are mystery novels / murder mystery novels. There is a novel for every letter of the alphabet. So these 3 are: F is for fugitive, H is for homicide, G is for gumshoe, which I found out when I started reading that one. Gumshoe is sort of like a slang term for investigator, private investigator, which I had no idea of, so that was interesting. F is for fugitive is about the character that all of these books are about. Her name is Kinsey Milhone. She is a private investigator, and in this book she is going and trying to help understand a case that happened 20 years prior about a guy who was accused for murder, went to jail, escaped, had been on the run for 15 years, and was finally recaught, and she is investigating the case to find out if he actually did it or not. I'm not gonna spoil it in case you want to read it yourself. H is for homicide is about Kinsey Milhone basically going undercover into this major car insurance fraud scheme that was happening, and she goes undercover to try to help fish out who the main heads of it are. Almost dies in the process, learns a lot of really interesting things. You know, she's a private investigator. She's not supposed to be undercover, but here she is. And G is for Gumshoe is about Kinsey being hired by a family to track down their mother, who was living by herself in the desert, and throughout all of this realizes that she got on to a mob boss's hit list for getting him put into jail, and has to then deal with running away from the hitman, and in the process of trying to find this family's mother, realizing that there might actually be a serial killer living not that far from her. And finally, the last book that I have finished, I just finished recently, and that is The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I read the unabridged version, which is very, very thick, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I will say it is nothing like the Disney movie at all. I'm not going to go into that much detail about this book because I plan on doing a whole video in and of itself of describing the differences / similarities, if there are any, to Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame and Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame. Be on the lookout for that. It should be going up next week. Very good read. Highly recommend. It's very dark. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well. Of those 4 books that I finished, 3 of them were very easy to read, 1 of them was a very difficult read, and then The Surprised by Hope that I finished reading that I ended up listening to more than physically reading. So I still have these 3 in my reading list to get through, which I'm fairly confident I'm going to. I'm not that worried about it. The book I am currently reading is a book called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Children Television, and Fred Rogers. And this book, we found at a Goodwill a while back, and it's very interesting because this book, instead of it being one person who wrote it and is talking about Fred Rogers' life, whether it be a biography or whatever, this is actually, every chapter is written by somebody different, and they are approaching talking about Fred Rogers in a different way, whether it be a specific aspect of his personality or whether it be him in television and where he got started, to different stories of them meeting him personally. Each chapter is different. I've read about 2 chapters in here, and I am now going through, because the 2 chapters that I read were not the first 2 chapters, so I'm now going back from the beginning, which is why it's not very far in there at all, and reading from the beginning of the book. But I was really interested in the fact that every chapter was written by somebody different, because then you get all of these different viewpoints and you get to see Fred Rogers from all of these different angles and lights. And I always really liked Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, so I thought this was going to be a very interesting read. Now, on top of all of these books, Dan and I are reading together the Lord of the Rings trilogy. We are on the Return of the King currently. We are probably 4 or 5 chapters into it. But that's something that we've been doing ever since we were married. I think even before we were married, is we would read books out loud together. Dan would mostly read them out loud and I listen. And so we've been doing that, and we are working our way through, like I said, The Return of the King. One other great way that I get listening in and reading in is by listening to audiobooks. Like I said, Surprised by Hope, I was able to finish because I listened to the audiobook of it. And the book that Dan and I are currently listening to together is Moby Dick, which, even just from the handful of it that we've listened to so far, I know for a fact this is not the type of book I would be able to sit down and read. I would not be able to focus long enough to understand and retain what the storyline or anything like that, but being able to listen to it and listen to somebody tell the story fluidly and give the different characters different voices to differentiate what's happening makes it so much easier for me to follow along with, and I thoroughly enjoy it. And I didn't know how funny of a book Moby Dick is. It's actually really funny, and Herman Melville is like a really witty writer, and I had no idea. So that was a really fun surprise. Like I said, we are not even halfway through listening to it yet, but it's really good and I'm really enjoying it. I had no idea. That is my halfway through 2020 reading list update. Let me know in the comments below what books you guys are currently reading. Give me a quick little summary of what they're about. I am always looking for new reads that would be interesting. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I wanted to make this mostly for myself so I can see where I am and I can look back and be like, oh yeah, I was starting to read more. Oh yeah, I did read that book. Oh yeah, that's what that book was about. But I hope you guys all have a great day and I will see you in the next video. Bye! Also, just in case you're curious, my sister, who is an author, released a new book called The Firstborn Daughter. It is a young adult fantasy book about magic. Harper Chase, who is the main character, she has magical abilities. There is a guy trying to steal them from her by any means possible, including killing her. So she is trying to defeat him and all of the darkness that is involved in that. And it is a very fun read. I highly recommend if you like young adult romance, magic related books.